Thank you, Dipankar. Thank you, IIC. Thank you, friends, for coming. Now, this has been a bottled up work which has come out twice before, and now I really intend to make it a serious job. Basically, I've used words after a lot of thought. I could have said conglomeration, the coordination of the Hindu identity. I would rather put it, after all the data sort of spins itself out, that while the Islamic identity in Bengal was also, after a point of time, a deliberate effort. It was a constructed identity that sort of merged into the landscape. The western part of Bengal's Hindu identity was a response. Now, we'll start with the first one. This is the first one of the initial, it's too hazy, one of the initial maps of Bengala as they called it at that time. I started with a case study of the Dharma cult, which I'll mention, but has now subsumed itself into just a tiny pocket here. There's some intensive anthropological work here. Then I widened it to cover a genre of poetry called Mangal Kavyas. Now, this is unique to Bengal. Jagran songs are not, they are all over India, but why the purpose, I'll mention. Then I moved on to agriculture and the peasantization as it came in, and how this synchronized with the social milieu through the Mangal Kavyas and their performance, the performative and the economical. And then Chaitanya, whom you can't ignore in Western Bengal. Since it traversed the disciplines of history, anthropology, and literature, I belong to none of them, and all of them assiduously disown me. This is one of the early maps where I would just like to show you how the rivers crisscross and cut Bengal into different segments. I'll come to a clearer map. This is by William Blue, one of the lesser known maps. 1600, we get the first European vision through Van der Broek. 1680, 1779, Renel, and it goes on. Please note how the rivers cut, and the next one is a clearer map of what Bengal, the logical divisions of Bengal, the ancient divisions of Bengal were. Now, on top you'll see Barendra as the Bengalis call it, sometimes known as Pondra. But Barendra remains perhaps till now one of the most aristocratic regions, both for Muslims and for Hindus. But then power shifted a little down to the junction of the Padma, Brahmaputra. That became the most, let us say, the hub on the entrepot, and that became the growth center. So Vanga, which was a secondary, would now subsume or would enlarge its identity, Vanga, into Bongo, as a Bengalis pronounce it, Bangla, Bongo. The word comes from here. There is an eastern edge called Harikela. This is the backwoods of Bengal from where I come. It's Chittagong, Noakhali, Sylhet, Tripura, that part which is largely Mongolian to a large extent, and they have been let's say, the mixed frontier between the Indo-Chinese waves that came into India and the main stock of Indian civilization, whatever that means. On the left, or on this side, on the extreme west, we see Rada. Now, Rada has been known as a western tract, but we'll see something very interesting. If you notice, Rada has the signs of West Bengal in the offing. Only the neck is missing. This map and its earlier version, which I just couldn't trace before this, the 1881 census. The first census was 1872, not 71, because the finance department held back the file, as usual. And therefore, it was 1882. It was done by a young man called Beverly. The second census, Ashita, come in here. The second census was more interesting. It was called the Beverly census because this is more comprehensive. This is Beverly's census, based on Beverly's census, because hardly anything changes after this. Only the intensity of populations go on changing. The census of 1881 and 1931, they sort of fall into one pattern. But what's clear from here is that the river Bhagirathi, which I painted in blue, everything west of the Bhagirathi was Hindu majority. East of the Bhagirathi, only 3 tracts were there. As you can see in the Sundarban belt, we have Calcutta, Chobis Pargana, and Khulda. Barely. Majority doesn't mean overwhelming, barely. And on top, you have the Jalpaiguri tract, which are there, which really doesn't count at that point of time. On the extreme, you have the Chittagong Hill tracts that are not Hindu, but Hindu-Buddhist. So we are concentrating, because you can't dissipate the argument, concentrating on these districts that I have called the districts of Birbhum, that's the top. Then you come to Bardhaman. Then below that is Hooghly. And then you have Midnapur. And then Bankura. Bengal ends logically as a socio-cultural unit at Bankura. Purulia comes in much later of the division of Manbhum. And Purulia also had a large Bengali population, but certainly not overwhelming, just like Darjeeling would be added later on. This is more or less the traditional profile. The question is, in the clearer versions you'll see, apart from the 5 divisions that we saw earlier, I have referred to the 1881 census as a defining moment. The percentage of Muslims was found to be 50%. 50% shocked the Bengali Babu. There is still a saying in 2016, Ami Bangali, O Musalman. This haughtiness of claiming that I am a Bengali bracket Hindu and he is a Musliman is so ingrained in the Babu blood that they just challenge this figure. They said, can't be, they're not visible. Beverly and Burdula went through this exercise of explaining to the Chief Secretary that, well, the Babus have their point, the Hindus have their point, but the fact is I could not make them get into the interior. If the census operators had got deep into the interior, the percentage would be higher, as was proved in 1931. The point is not who wins in percentage. The point is, why is it that this part would be green and therefore would be the next stage of become the state of East Pakistan and Bangladesh? The question here that I'm addressing is not this. It is the only Muslim majority bloc west of the Indus River, east of the Indus River. If you choose, there have been pockets because Islam had been basically a town-concentrated movement. Kasbah, court, forts, etc., ports. And there had been concentration, but such a large blob of contiguous districts, this was the only other example, which is the reason why you got 2 Pakistans. But that is, as I'm saying, not my central concern. I start with the definition saying that look at the spatial division, how it's not crisscross like in Punjab, but spatially divided. And why is it that the western part was Hindu? Now, this I had started on field work and for years together was tossing around until I came to what I call the next part. Divide was spatial. In 1931 Bengal, I'm repeating, Muslims were 55%, Hindus were 44%. In 1881, they were 50 and 48. Explaining the Muslim majority in Bengal has been a favorite sport of many an academic, and there are entire generations that have done their work. Lately, the Cambridge School does a lot of work on it. Now, of the most tenable theories that one accepts nowadays, no theories, in social sciences, no theory is a law, is the one by Richard Eaton, and that's also sort of accepted in many universities. The rise of Islam in the Bengal frontier. He cuts through all the other theories of speculation that it was a sword that got it. For the sword to get it, you would require empirical proof. It comes in through land tenure obligations. You go through the land tenurial system, you'll find where the sword has been rewarded. Of course, there have been uses of the sword here and there. It has been used in the district of Sylhet, for instance. But sword was not, Eaton contends, and I agree, not the defining factor. Inducements. Again, he goes over the argument, I won't repeat. State power empowering Sufis. Every historian knows the state and Sufi power have always been at loggerheads. There would hardly, the Chistiyas represent the maximum distance that the Sufis keep from the state. So the Sufi orders and the state power have always been at loggerheads, and in Bengal it was no different. There have been brief spaces of honeymoon where the Sultan and the Nawab patronized a particular silsila, but that was it. So he went through, all the Buddhists left for Islam. Since the Buddhist leaders were shaven-headed, we call them Nada, so therefore all became Nada and things like that. These are conjectures made without empirical proof, but there is a grain of truth in all of them. That one can't deny. What happened, according to Eaton, was a change in the economic system led to peasantization. Now, everybody did some amount of peasant work. What is this peasantization? As economic historians should know, it is a swing to the peasant profession, the farming profession, as a full-time vocation, as distinguished from a weaver who also does farming, from a service person, a malakar who makes garlands, also does a little farming. This was professional farming, which would then give us allocable surpluses for taxation and for state power to build itself. And obviously, all taxing authorities have encouraged professional work. In Bengal, I will skip this part. It started with a coup by Ikhtiaruddin bin Bakhtiar Khilji. We claim it was 1202, that is 1.5 to 2 years before the Delhi Sultanate. They came as horse traders, but that is not my concern. And it was said to be a light state. Again, that's not my concern. But what was there, the interesting part of the first 300 years of Islamic rule in Bengal, or Islamic rulers in Bengal, if I'm more particular, was that they soon developed a Bengali character which was genetically programmed against Delhi. So this anti-Delhi thing and things like that, this goes on for a long time, and Bengal, as you know, specializes in always electing a government that is diametrically opposite to Delhi, whatever be it, either way. So this sort of political character comes from there. Even the sultans who came over turned out to be anti-Delhi and fought Delhi. Now, the main purpose is Eaton's thing was that it was led by adventurers whom we call charismatic personalities, and there is enough proof of it. At every 10 yards, 100 yards in many places, we see a dargah. Bengal is pock with dargahs, much more than perhaps any other state. These were in later deified, if I may use the term, or honored as peers and ghazis. At every street crossing, you have a peer and a ghazi. Now, he says that the folklore of Bengali Islam, the numerous dargahs, that these were leaders who just led out the three professional castes, the three original castes, the three autochthonous class, that is the sons of the soil, the three main bulk of Bengal's population, the fishermen, Jalia or Kaivarta, the Gop, that is the Gwala or the what do you call the pastoralist. So you have the fisherman as one block, which explains why every Bengali has fish, because that was the only source of protein available if you just put your hand out. The Jalia, broadly speaking. The pastoralist, who are called in Bengali as Gop, for some reason, Gop from Gopal. And the third was the forest people, who branded under different names. The forest people went under different names. Now, this movement of taking these three castes out of their vocations, that is from a pastoralist, from a fisherman, and from his hunter-gatherer stage, to the stage of higher settled agriculture on abundant pieces of alluvial soil, was led by people who at that point of time may or may not have been Muslims. But the fact remains, at the end of it, since they were excommunicated, they decided that this would be the peers and ghazis that I mentioned. Now, the peerism as an Indian response, as an Indian dilution or whatever of Islam, this is not my subject. Now, which were the silsilas? Well, the Chistiyas. As you know, every Bangladeshi, the moment he hits India, heads straight for Ajmer. That is the spiritual center. The Chistiyas led it, the Suravardis led it. the Qadariyas led it. Not all silsilas were operative. The Naqshbandis were to some extent, the Kalandaris were to some extent, but the three main are the Chistiyas, the Qadariyas, and the Sarawardis. Now, we have, in addition to this Pir and Ghazi, we have this Darweshes. In fact, Bengali sweets are also known as Darwesh. So this thing, and some of the important characters at this point in time were Shah Jalal, a very, very controversial person. I won't get into this because he is the only one who literally declared jihad, but it was such a small area that you couldn't really generalize. Shah Jalal is taken as both sides. Then you have Khan Jahan. You have Baba Adam. Baba Adam, I doubt whether he came all the way from Punjab, but there are stories that he came over. And you have Sharafuddin. There's a lot of work on this. I'm not going to repeat it. My submission is that when we come to our subject of the Western Bloc, the pink bloc that you saw, why was it different? Why did it go against the mainstream? Okay. As I've said from the two censuses, or this group of censuses, the Rad of the western part was different. The west and southwest differed from east and north. 20% of Bengal's area was here, according to the census, and 21% of the population, according to the mature censuses. Muslims accounted for 14.1. And I'll show you. These were the population, and this is how it turned back. But these are all available in the website. Whereas in non-Rad districts, the rest of Bengal, ROB or whatever we call it, the four other divisions, the average was 68.4%. So what explains 14% here and 68.4% there? The question was, why was a Hindu majority in the Rad only? Number one. Why were eaten so successfully described factors not operative in the Rad? And third, my response, well, some of these eaten factor did work, but they worked in favor of Hinduism as you move along. I'll explain this in the next step. Now, the Rad was given different names in Bengali, the social milieu. They were called as chuars. Every Bengali knows that a Radi, while a Radi Brahman or a Radi caste or a Radi something, etc., means a respectable sort of a thing, the word Redo was a pejorative way of addressing the Dehati or the half-civilized Dehati. Then you have Chuars, the Chuar rebellions, which was again an autochthonous movement. One word that comes out in medieval literature was a word of scorn that comes out both in Hindu and Muslim literature. It was called Bhilloprai. First of all, I didn't understand, then I understood. You're almost as bad as the Bhils. You just come out. Bhilloprai. Took some time to understand this. Even Chaitanya's Charitamrit, one of the famous literature of Krishnadas Kaviraj, uses these terms. The amount of scorn. Now, let's not get these two confused about an aristocratic Rad and a non-aristocratic Rad. Rad on the river belt, if you go along the river belt, had lots of little towns and settlements where you had Brahmanical and other settlements of traders. Once you left 10 miles, 20 miles into it, you either got into marshy land or you got into the forests. And that was a fact. That remains a fact, as I'll prove. Within the Rad, as I said, the Muslim population was 5% in Bankura, less than 5, 7.5% in Mednipur, 27% in Birbhum, which is pretty high, 21% in Howrah. Now, these populations don't hold good anymore because after the relocation of population from the east, they have all changed, obviously. Whereas in Bogra, just across the river in East Bengal, it was Muslim population was 83.4%. These are so stark. How do we explain the Hindu majority in the Rad when the so-called upper caste constituted only 6.4% of the population? And this 6.4 is very interesting. Brahmins were 2.8%, consistently between 2.7 and 2.8, which is extremely high for a Brahmin. which means a Bengali Brahmin went on acquiring country cousins all along. And the Vaidya, a very small community of, well, there are some around, including my chairman. So we better call it Brahman, Vaidya Brahman. My mother happens to be one, so better call it Vaidya Brahman. It's a Brahmanical group, let's face it. And the Kayasthas are rather very dubious indigenous lot that have come in with shades of respectability, were 3.05%. So don't look at me like that. Now, at the end of it, we find 6.4% is a constitution of the so-called clean upper and respectable classes. How on earth do you get a majority? And this is where I use something like polls and all this to find out. The so-called backward groups were 14%. The Antajas, I don't like the word SC, Dalit and others. They're so pejorative, they're so fixated with images. So use the pure word which is value neutral, Antaja. It has been used many times. You can call them SC if you want, but Antaja is the marginal people. The marginals were 30, and something very strange, the Hindu agriculturists, where on earth did he come from? Because all agriculturists are Muslims. This is where the RAR story comes in, by 22%. Together, 66%. 66 and 6.4 does make a sizable percentage. The story is how were they brought in. Okay. Three phenomena appeared, which I would say were almost unique only to the Western belt. First was Chaitanya. As everybody knows, Chaitanya influenced Bengal and many states outside Bengal, including Odisha and many other places. But Chaitanya's sphere of activity was west. He may have originated from the east. His sphere of activities was the Ganga River, Bhagirathi, and west of it and south of it to Odisha. His sphere of activities. So Chaitanya as a factor, it takes a long time for a factor to reach other parts. Chaitanya as a factor was western. The Mangal Kavyas, which most people think, most Bengalis who have to go through this mandatory course in Bengal, in your history of literature, thought was an all-Bengal phenomenon, was actually not. I have gone through the literature, I've gone through the poets, I've gone through it all. Well, there have been a couple of poets who came in from, not couple, 3, 4 of them who were technically in the east. But all other poets have traced their roots out. There's a very easy way of doing it. If you start the Kavya, there is something called Bhanita, where he introduces himself, so you get his address or claimed address, claimed lineage. They were all from the West. I'll come to that point later. And peasantization, the peasant economy, came late to the Rad. Chaitanya's Vaishnavism, peasant Mangal Kavyas and their message, and peasantization, these were factors unique or concentrated on the East. These were not pre-planned. Like all parts of history, nothing was pre-planned. In fact, the Hindu response is never pre-planned, or was never pre-planned. I don't know is, but never. But they were acted in tandem. Like in history, they acted in tandem. And this new inclusiveness that they brought in won the game. Plus, economics of agriculture led to the Hindu majority in the West. This is my submission. Now, let's start opening up. Rad in the 15th century. Let's start with Rad in the late 15th. Rad opened up later than others. See table 2. I'll show you. This is very interesting. This Richard Eaton has used, and so I also use this method. We went through the inscriptions of donations to various grands, temples, Devattar, Brahmottar, Pirottar, and found that it was an expression of class society, expression of those who had surpluses in favor of what they believed. We have 2 out of 5 in the first stage, which is fair enough. With the second stage of penetration, the Ilyas Shahi, we have 1 out of 11. In the third stage of Bengal, called the later Ilyas Shahi and Habshi, that Abyssinian rulers, we had 2 out of 18 in the Rad. Now, okay, they weren't found. They weren't found applies also to the East. So it's a fair deal. Basic point that I'm making here is that the number of inscriptions which indicate a degree of acceptance within the network of civilization, if one may use such a pejorative, such a well-loaded term, was not there. It opens up during Hussain Shah, where you get 2 out of 18. This is, I'm talking the Mints part. Sorry, I missed out the earlier one. The inscriptions were 3 out of 10 in the pre-Ilyas Shahi, the first phase of Islamic rule. In the second phase, we had 2 out of 6, which is fair enough. In the third phase, Ilyas Shahi, you had 7 out of 75 inscriptions only. Logically, it should be 20%. In the third stage, Hussain Shahi. Now, Hussain Shahi, we had a very interesting one. During the Hussain Shahi stage, Odisha, Rudra Pratap Dev attacked or went into, penetrated deep into Bengal. His logic was that this is fair and open territory. It's sort of contiguous to me and I just move in, that's all. There was no response until Hussain Shah decided to push them back. And the entire Rad Bhumi turned out to be a contentious issue between the Sultans of Bengal and the Rudra Pratap Dev of Odisha. So you have a large segment, Odisha came and ruled up to half of the Rad, a fact that we don't repeat. But there are facts. These facts have to be taken in. And they left behind a sediment of population in Midnapur, which is pretty fair. Now, later on, then we get the Afghan chiefs, where you have some amount of penetration, but then 3 against 20. And I'm trying to show from hard inscriptions and mint towns, the two logic that was used, that how little was a penetration in the Rad, because there are other indices also, which I've shown in my writing, but this is very material. Incidentally, that territory which was disputed, the Rad territory, that is Bankura, Birbhum, Bardhaman, Hooghly, is romanticized in Bengali literature as a forested area where palkis go in with a lot of lathis, where you don't know what's coming up next. And that romance has been carried on till by Sarat Chandra, by Tagore also, that what happens, mother, if you go out, the dacoits will get you. This dacoited territory was mainly in the west. So this image of it being, and the best part of it, the most telling word here is that still the corridor that runs from Birbhum all the way up to Jharkhand is still called Jungle Mahal. They are the Jungle Mahal tracts in which, as collector, which was just an accident, the laws were different to large extent, the pattas were different. It runs through all. If you have ever driven to Shantiniketan or something, you would have gone through forest. It's still a forested tract that has been retained. So the entire tract was forested except on the sides of the river. And there have been routes, trading routes and everything, but at your own risk. Now, this is what I call the late opening up of Rad. The second interesting thing is that, second interesting notice is that where the Antaja, the marginal people, are concerned, you will see an extreme concentration in the Rad in the Hindu fold. You can't, unbelievable figures. 97% of all Baudis are either in the Rad or just in the adjacent district. I'll show you. These are what we call the marginal people. They are all now classified as SC. Baudis, 97% in Rad and adjoining. Bagdi, the Lathial class, 87%. Dome, 85%. Jalia, 74%. Dhopa, I don't know why they should be classed there, but anyway, there's Dhobi, they're at 70%. Chamar Mochi as 59%. So this intense concentration of retention of the Antaja within the Hindu fold shows a degree of flexibility that was suddenly adopted in this part to retain them. And it goes on. This was a find that I found from my anthropological studies, which I just punched into history. There are differences between their approaches. Now, Rad opened up late, and as I've shown you, the gravitation of SCs, if you want to call them, was to Hinduism only in this part. The question is, what happened to the Antajas in the east? One answer is obvious, but the second answer is there are some who stayed back, like the Namasudras. They never converted for some reason, or a lesser percentage converted. The one that who didn't convert stayed as Namasudras, as a huge block, and still are there in Western Bengal, Chaubish Pargana to some extent. Well, they maintain their identity because of certain cohesive factors, because of sheer numbers. It said about a third had converted. Now, if a religion and an economic system has offered a higher status in life, it's moved on. But this is one group where group cohesion mattered more. One of the very strange examples. We now come to the first factor, Chaitanya's Vaishnavism. If you notice, Chaitanya and Gauranga Nityananda, going through the forest, imagine. Can you see a tiger there? That's what it was all imagined. Chaitanya made this heroic journey from Nadia to Jharkhand. He went through what you call Vishnupur, which was all forested territory. And his companion, Nityananda, they have been portrayed as a part of the folklore, as the cultural ethos of Bengal, as liberators in their own way. As soon as Chaitanya died, Nityananda would be cornered, as I'll show you, by the 6 Goswamis, the Shodogosai. The 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan almost expelled him. He remained a Trotskyite till his last day. He remained a fountainhead for all insidious activities by subaltern groups. He went on accommodating them. As I said, Chaitanya aroused egalitarian expectations. It was a very bold decision in those days to go against the mainstream of Smarta, Shastric Brahmanism, to take it on and be heckled every now and then. He did. But after Chaitanya's death, the top Vaishnavas, they were known as a group called 6 Goswamis or 6 Goshais, shut their doors to the Antajas. It's a fact of history. And the only Nityananda continued, as I mentioned, in his travels. Thus, in 1931, there is a caste that was spawned called, it's like the Lingayat, called Jat Vaishnav, Jat Bostom. Their numbers were 0.66%. So in terms of direct conversion on Chaitanya's message, the results were not this thing. But this is misleading because Chaitanya's impact on a carnivorous race is to be seen to be believed. Almost half the so-called Bengali Hindus claim to be Vaishnava. They eat meat and fish, never mind. But there's a certain degree of pacifism in their soul, perhaps. So, but there he has left an impact, and he has linked the eastern state to the mainstream with Vrindavan. That's his major. But his revolution legitimized inclusiveness. It was almost, as I say, like the Lokpal bill. You have got your constitutional amendment through. You've got your constitutional amendment through. That was his main role. Maybe not in terms of vote bank and numbers, but his one. And there's something more interesting we don't talk about. 2 castes of ancestry that needs to be delved into in greater detail. The Vaidya, or the Vaidya Brahman, and the castes came into before the lock gate fell. And these two will form a block with the Brahmins into what is known as the famous Bhadralok triumvirate of Bengal. That has not allowed a single person from any other group other than these 3 to ever rule Bengal, to ever become a chief secretary, to ever become anything. That's all. It's casteless. Let's forget it. And I would say the constitutional amendment was his main task. Next, the second factor, Mangal Kavyas. This was, of course, this is a very modern picture. I couldn't get any earlier picture of what we call the Kavis, Pathaks, Kathaks, whatever name. Work on the Mangal Kavyas as historical material had been started by Tapan Kumar Rai Chaudhary, the first historian who started. It was taken up by one of my good friends who died very early, Kumkum Chatterjee. Kunal has done a lot of work on it, Kunal Chakrabarti of JNU. Aniruddha Lahiri has done. But I still say historians are not touching a virgin sphere field of information. Let me give you an example. Of the 60 odd Mangal Kavyas that you find, of the 30 odd that you find about, let us say, Chandi Mangal, you have a episode or a narrative called Phullara's Baramasi. Baramasi everybody understands. How she describes her 12 months. If all contending differing poets have a degree of commonality about what Phullara says, you have found out from the subaltern view what was the social life of the poor at that time. There are no inscriptions left behind. There are no poverty studies, NSS surveys left. This is the only material you have over the real life of the poor person in Bengal. So this is an area where we have to get in. They were ballads and minstrels, and remember, this was the only form of entertainment. I repeat, this was the only form of entertainment available. What we call the Jager Gan, Jagaran, throughout the night. And we have various subgenres of this. We have the Maiman Singh Gitika, beautiful songs, rhythmic songs. We have Mayanamatir Gan. We have lots of Gan. But the difference with Mangal Kavya is none of them had a bottom line and a front line. The bottom line of Mangal Kavya was it started with an autochthonous, derided god. It derided it all through. It juxtaposed mainstream Hinduism because the first two palas, the first two acts, would invariably talk of Ganga, Saraswati, Sindhu, Kaveri, Krishna, and it would go on extolling. So you were linking it through, it was a mandatory lesson to those who were hearing, and then you got into the story. I'll come to it. So you had this Jager Gans of different type. Why was the Mangal Kavya different? Well, number one, it was centered mainly in the Rad. I have gone into the locales. I have gone into the characters. I have taken this on the Bangla department of Jadavpur and others, and they have all come back. They said, well, we didn't look at it from your census point of view. Well, I said, please look at it. All the characters, almost all, an exception doesn't make a rule, most writers were from the Rad. Most writers were from the Rad, and most means almost everyone. I have the list with me here. And the Kavyas, so it was written by rural Brahmins who constituted about 85% of the database I have with me. We may be wrong somewhere. Well, okay, I'll run through some names and surnames. Bhatta, Mayura Bhatta and others. Chakravarti, another very dubious, omnibus, my mistake. An omnibus name on which you can get every person coming in. Chakravarti is a title like mine, a very dubious one. So you can hide your actual origins. So we have Mukundaram Chakravarti, Ghanaram Chakravarti, Khelaram Chakravarti, Rupram Chakravarti, Sabhadev Chakravarti, I haven't gone, Chakravarti. Prabhuram Mukherjees, Govindaram Banerjees, Panujjes, Manikram Ganguly, Nidhiram Ganguly. So I think even a person who doesn't belong to Bengal would know that these are all Brahmanical groups. Well, there are a couple of them where we can't be sure from the surname because they assume a title. Like many Hindi poets, they assume a name, so we can't. But then when you get into Bhanita, his own self-introduction, where he uses the word Dijyo and others, you can make out. My submission is that this was it. The second is, Kavyas were performed between 16 and 36 nights. 16 pala, 18 pala, 36, 36 pala. 36 nights after harvest, they were up there. This explains the institutional insomnia that grips Bengal. This explains why they have their dinner at 11:30, when most good Tamils have gone off to sleep. I mean, this explains that this fascination for seeing all-night things, and you can see people dozing off at jatras and all that, but this is an institutional thing. And the other thing that attracted me was the target of all these gods was never a Brahmin, was never a Kaist, was never a Vaidya. The target was Saudagar. Saudagar, which is a post-Islamic term, number one. Saudagar went, the Banik, the Vanya, So the target of society in the 16th, 17th or earlier narrations was the rich man. Please convert to Manasa. Please convert to Chandi. The hegemony of the triumvirate of Brahman, Vaidya, Kayastha would actually take place in the pre-colonial stage, just touching pre-colonial stage. It is only, I'll do something. So that is one. And let me get over the three stories a bit. Mansa Mangal, here is, as an amateur anthropologist, I would say, a malevolent deity. But one of the fascinating studies of Hinduism is the lack of difference between the malevolent and the benevolent. This is one of their Mangal Kavyas that I just read out to you. So here is the difference between the malevolent and the benevolent. Benevolent between a propitiation to, let us say, Shani or some other thing, is still taken within the broad spectrum of the religion. Still taken within the broad spectrum of the religion. And here is the story of Mansa where she actually starts with a lot of curses and then takes over. The interesting part is the last part where the Shaivite turns himself from Shaiva worship to Manasa. He says, I'm going to throw my flower with my left hand. Left-handed acceptance in every sense of the term. Chandi Mangal, this Chandi Mangal, Dharma Mangal, we're not getting into that. I'm getting to just a macro structure. They represented the subaltern gods and goddesses, and the running commentary here was, the Mangal Kavyas start by deriding them. They start by bringing in Puranic gods and goddesses and the all India scene. Then they enter into the heroics of the worshipper of this god or that goddess. Then a struggle begins which goes on to 8 or 10 palas between the Brahmanic god, whether it be Shiv versus Manasa, Durga versus Chandi, and ultimately the victory belongs to the subaltern god. To the subaltern god. Jai Ho. It takes another 100 years, just about 100 more years, to convert the subaltern god into some sort of a blood relation of the Puranic goddess. But that's a different part of the story. So here, this is the distinguishing mark that the outstretch of the response. There's one more coming.
Dhammo hoila jaban rupi, mathaye to kalo tupi, hate lobe triruch kaman. Brahma hoilo Muhammad, Vishnu hoila Pekambar, Adampo hoilo Sulupani, Ganesh hoiya Gaji, Kartik hoilo Kaji, Fakir hoila.
So can you understand? Here is a text that is within the Dharma Puran, this completely, as I said, this very strong view where you see the welcome to Islam that has been often mentioned in British literature and in some of this, but you find it here. Here is a link with agriculture. I'm coming to the third point. Economics and appropriation. Judgmani and clientele are essential for all religions. There is no religion that can say I don't need it. More so for the only hereditary priesthood that had to be maintained here, but it consisted of different classes within the Brahmanical caste. This Martha was usually looked after, the university professor, cribbing all the time, but gets his grants anyway. Panda had a source of livelihood. The Agradani was looked down upon for having taken offers from all and sundry, from the unclean people. But the persons we are bothered about is the Purohit class. This accounts for 90% or thereabouts of the Brahmanical class. And this is the one that was most affected because they were not getting sufficient clientele. Islam spread through a similar methods, as I said, silsilas and khankas. But by the 16th century, they had weakened. In Western Bengal, their presence was far less. Religions appropriate cults. This is universal. But Bengal is an extreme case about which I can talk about. The short point is, where Shastris failed the East, the foot soldiers won the West. St. Augustine's twin swords, render unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar, render unto God what belongs to God, even if you can't afford it. Now, last is peasantization. As I said, alluvial lateritic plus forest, the Jangal Mahal tract. I've used the pejorative terms. The main three castes have gone over. These became Bede, the hunter, Gope, the pastoralist, Jele, the fisherman. Bede, Gope, Jele, teen holo hele, three became turned to the hull, that is to the hull. They were not expelled. They were not expelled and accepted into the Hindu fold. Whereas in the East, everybody was expelled, which explains, unlike the East, they formed the new Hindu majority, core of the new Hindu majority. And the last one of consequence, Shivayan was a fourth form of Mangal Kavya that was brought in with Bom Bhola, not the Kailash Shiv, as the prototype of Bengal. This is a stylized version, but the usual version we know is a pot-bellied presence with a torn gamcha, chased around by his rather strong wife, and other things like that. But chased around, moving around with his gunners and all that. That is the image. The small point here is that where it comes to even the acceptance of God, when Shiva was accepted into the Hindu fold or the Bengali Hindu fold, he was not the Kailash Shiv. He was the peasant Shiv. So this subaltern or this of the what you call the anti-class bias of Bengal, which was nurtured by Buddhism and continued for the last 35 years on Marxist rule, it has a cultural basis. I mean, they're putting down. So even Shiva was pulled down to this level. Now, there's a direct contact between Shiva's Puran and this Puran, but that's a later story. Rad's agriculture factors that mattered, apart from the wish and this enabling environment, geographers called it the moribund delta. By the 17th century, Ganga's flow shifted east to Padma. Everybody knows it. This flow helped the Mughal flotillas capture Dhaka in the east. What happened was the water, Damodar also turned south gradually from the eastward between 1690 and 1770. I had done some RADSAT figures, so we have it. This turning would help in creating abundant water channels, which I'll show you. As you can see, that is the Bhagirathi snaking down south, and this is the Ganga, this is the Damodar that suddenly turned south. The area that lay in between consisted of rivers like Khodi, Baka, Behula, Gangur, Dhual. These all became weak. They became sources of water in deswamped and deforested alluvial land, or even part lateritic land, to produce some of the finest crops possible. This was a piece borrowed from geography, took some time. The other one is this map, which is also a carry-off on this. This is after Rudra, 2001. As you can see, the swampy areas. Now, the interesting part of it is that this is second last. Water channels helped agriculture in an unusual way, but malaria also came in. Bengal's famous malaria was exported from these belts because they were stagnant water channels. They were replenished every now and then by the rains, but then they were stagnant. The culture of agriculture comes in with vachans, khonar bachon, daker bachon. So there are hundreds of doggerels and idioms. And it also explains that the first broadcast rice that was introduced here in the West was different because it didn't have sufficient water to start with. It was harvested in Ashwin Kartik, which explains why Bengalis have this pujas during the most hot and humid period of the year. Though their crops have now shifted to November, their puja remains in the month of October, September. Conclusion. Chaitanya broke down Hindu orthodoxy. That is his main legitimizing function. The Mangal Kavyas legitimized folk deities of the downtrodden. New agricultural castes were welcomed into the Hindu fold, unlike in the East. History has its own quirks that, as I explained to you, that geographical shifts. The three phenomena interacted to some degree in their hour, and the British census would do the rest. Split and box identities. Why I use this? There are still hundreds of social groups like the Patuas who draw chitras, who have binary identity, who have two identities. They have Muslim names, they celebrate Muslim festivals, But their entire vocation is on singing the praises of gods and goddesses. And they were the ones who were told to make up their mind. Are you this box or are you that box? Are you this box or that box? There is this boxing of identities that comes up after the 1872 census. And by 1930, it becomes a free-for-all. The Kaivartas who are turned to the Kevats who are turned to agriculture demand that they are not Kaivatas anymore, they are Mahishas, and they get that status. The Ugra Kshatriyas who came out of the forest demand that they are Ugra Kshatriyas, they are accepted as status. All these formative identities take place, and as we explained, the numbers 30, 14, 6, 6.4, you land up in 66%. This is my very quick run through, and I hope to get some questions from you.